Hey, Liberal Dan here, Liberal Dan Radio, talk from the left, that's right. Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Central here on YouTube. And another one of my videos in my video series of Coming to Terms with Activism. Now, in this video, I would highly urge that you go, if you haven't watched any of these yet, to go back and at least watch the first one. If you haven't, it's probably important that you do. So go ahead and do it. Have you done it? Okay, I trust you. So let's get started with talking about ACAB. So you say that, and there are a lot of people that get upset. A lot of people get upset at that because they either are police or they know police, and they're very upset about it because they're very defensive of the people who put on the badge and serve as police officers, and they don't want to hear that their friends or that their family members are bastards because they don't like the generalization that it implies. So, but here's what I want to suggest, that you want to think about why. Why are people saying ACAB? Why are people saying that all cops are bastards? Even if you're willing to admit that there are bad police officers. And I've talked to some people that won't admit that any are. And I've talked to some that will admit that some are. Well, let's take, for example, the case of Laquan McDonald. He was an individual that was shot outside of a Burger King. And one of the first things that the other police officers did, so Laquan McDonald was shot by a police officer. The other police officers did, when they got to the scene, was they attempted to go to the other establishments around the area and collect the videotapes, any recordings of the shooting. Did they do this to collect evidence in a homicide investigation to determine whether or not their fellow officer was justified in shooting this individual? No. They were doing it to protect their fellow officer, the thin blue line. How about Tamir Rice? Tamir Rice was shot by a police officer. The official line from that police officer's partner and from the department in general, if you remember, was that Tamir Rice was given warnings before he was shot. But then once we saw the video, we saw the truth. And the truth was that the police officer rolled up and shot immediately. So what does this tell us? This tells us that it's not just a few bad cops who are doing bad things, but there are additional police officers who will protect those bad officers, which starts to look less like a few individual bad officers, and it starts to look like more of a systemic issue that might be going on. Now, I've seen, you go into police stations, into training areas, and you see the thin blue line, and they stress, the thin blue line, and you shouldn't cross the thin blue line. Make sure that everybody stands together. Brotherhood, sisterhood, as siblinghood, if you will. The men and women of law enforcement all need to stand together. Well, there have been cases where a police officer stood up and said, look, this is a case where this police officer did something wrong. I, as a good police officer, am trying to turn in this bad police officer for doing a bad action. What was the result? The result of several of those circumstances that I saw were not the removal of the bad officer, but the termination of the officer trying to do the right thing. That clearly shows some systemic issues in those departments that protect the bad officers and throw out the good ones. They say a few bad apples spoil the bunch. Because that's the full saying. It's not just a few bad apples. It's a few bad apples spoil the bunch. So you have to get rid of the bad apples before the entirety gets spoiled. So when you're looking at a police department and you're seeing more than just one bad apple, but you're seeing a system that protects those bad apples, you're going to start seeing, oh, okay, well, here's a system that's just not working. And if you're protecting bad cops, then how are they not bad cops as well? Right? Does that make sense to you? Any cop who defends a bad cop is in and of themselves also a bad cop. So that's part and parcel as to why a person might say that all cops are bastards, because they're seeing a system where the departments as a whole are defending and insulating police officers from investigations, from being terminated, from losing their jobs. I have had conversations, one of them on my podcast from somebody from out of state. I've had other conversations with other police officers where I had a theory that was going on because I'd seen several videos where I saw police officers shouting, "Stop grabbing for my gun, stop grabbing for my gun." And it was clear that there was nobody grabbing for anybody's gun at that point. And I was wondering, is this police officer shouting this to give himself plausible deniability in case he has to use deadly force, or in case he chooses to use deadly force, so that in a trial, this person would be able to get off and be acquitted because him shouting, "Stop reaching for my gun," would give reasonable doubt to be able to would give enough doubt to be able to not convict. And we saw this happen in another case, I think it was New Jersey, where a police officer was yelling, "Stop reaching for my gun, stop reaching for my gun." And the only reason that the individual in question did not get arrested for resisting arrest, because a second police officer pulled up with their dash cam right in front of that car, and the dash cam caught the entire thing, and the person was not grabbing for the gun whatsoever. That second dash cam saved that person. So the police officer was clearly lying about anybody reaching for the gun. But when I had conversations with other people in law enforcement, they confirmed that it was an unofficial part of the training, that they would tell you. It's not in a manual, but they would say, if you're arguing, if you're fighting with somebody, if you're grappling with somebody, start yelling, "Stop resisting," and start yelling, "Stop reaching for my gun." Because it doesn't matter if they are or they're not. You're going to give yourself plausible deniability. You're going to give yourself enough doubt to make it so that a jury can't convict you, unless there's enough video evidence to show that they really weren't reaching for your gun. Which is why in Louisiana, you have a law that was trying to get passed that would allow them to arrest you and put you in jail or prison for 6 months and fine you a bunch of money if the police officer tells you to not approach within 25 feet of them having an altercation with somebody. So if you're more than 25 feet away or are 25 feet away and you start trying to approach and they tell you no, you have to stay back, and you continue to do so, you're now a criminal. And they can arrest you. Why? They don't want you getting closer. Why? Maybe they don't want you recording that. Why? Because they want to give themselves enough plausible deniability so they can get away, potentially, with bad actions. You have seen lots of examples of police departments fighting any sort of accountability. Furthermore, you have situations where you have persons, I'm a white guy, I typically don't have problems with police officers on my day-to-day basis, on my daily interactions. I don't see it. But there are people who are black, indigenous, and other persons of color who do have problems with police, where the police will prejudge them, or police will, in areas that do stop and frisk, they'll stop and frisk, and they do have bad interaction. There's a reason why Public Enemy said 911 is a joke. It's not because the police officers stand on the street corner and tell knock-knock jokes and do stand-up. It's because they're not to be trusted in that area, because they don't trust them to do the job that they're supposedly supposed to do, because they are not people that they trust at all. Why would they call them if it's just going to make their situation worse? So if your daily interactions with police officers are a negative thing, if you are a white person and you've never heard about the talk that black parents might have with their children, you might have to look that up and understand that if you have to have the talk with your kids, if that's the type of interactions that you as a black, indigenous, or person of color have with police officers regularly, you might look at police departments as a whole and say, I don't trust them, and why would you? It is the responsibility of the police departments to gain the trust and to earn the trust and to keep the trust of the people who they are responsible for policing, and not the other way around, especially when there's a history there of bad actors. Now, does that mean that I say all cops are bastards? No, because I told you to go watch that first video. I told you to go watch that first video first. I don't say all cops are bastards. Why? Even though I agree with all of that stuff that leads other people to say it, my conclusion is slightly different. My conclusion is ever so slightly different. Because I think there are systems in place that protect bad cops. I think there are systems in place that, I don't think it's just the people that do the bad actions. I think there are plenty of bad police officers in departments that are not just doing bad actions, but protecting the bad actors. And I'm not going to assume that any random police officer that I see on the street is going to be a good guy. I can't. Because I don't know what percentage of any police department is good or bad at any given time, in any municipality, state, city, what have you. I can't possibly know. Now, odds are, again, I'm not going to have problems with them because of my skin color. But at the end of the day, I'm still not going to say that all cops are bastards. Is this because I know some? That has a little bit to do with it. I happen to know a couple, and I don't believe that those people are bastards. I've heard those people be critical of those bad actors. So I know that they disagree with those things that are going on. But here's why I ultimately don't say that all cops are bastards. Because we don't have their backs when they do stand up and they do try and do the right thing and turn in the bad cops. The other story that I talked about earlier, the story that I talked about where you had a police officer who stood up and tried to turn in a bad police officer, and instead of that police officer getting canned, the good police officer lost her job. That shows that we don't have their backs. We as a society should have to prove that we will have the backs of any police officer who stands up and says, I'm going to take action. I am going to stand up against this system. And I'm going to work to shine a light on any injustices within the police department. And even if it means they lose their job. If they lose their job, then they get compensated as a whistleblower or what have you, that they're going to get compensated. That if they lose their jobs, then they automatically are granted some sort of stipend or whatever, or some sort of settlement that enables them to, you know, have their salary for the rest of their life because they did the right thing. Or something like that. Nobody should be put in the situation where they have to make the choice between supporting their family and doing the right thing like that. Now, you can argue, you can armchair quarterback all you want, and you can say, well, they should be automatically doing that right choice. And I'd like to think that I would make the right choice all the time as well. But I'm not in this situation. I'm not in law enforcement. I'm not in a situation where it's life and death. I'm not in a situation where I'm surrounded by a bunch of people who potentially could be bad actors, who all have guns, who could all get angry at me for turning on them because I'm wanting to do the right thing and they don't. How many of them don't? I don't know. That's why I won't say all cops are bastards. Because even though a bunch of them may very well be, we're not doing a good enough job protecting the good ones when they come forward. Now, if we were to do a good job and make sure that they knew that when they came forward, that they would be protected, that they wouldn't lose their jobs, that the other people would lose their jobs, that if we made sure that those systems would be toppled to the core, that we would top down just eliminate all the bad apples when the good ones shined a light on them, and it still didn't happen in any particular department, and if a department still acted bad and nobody came forward in that department, then sure, in that department I would then say, yeah, all of those cops are bastards. Absolutely. But we're not there yet. And until we're there, I don't say the term. However, I still agree with all of the things that get those people there. And that's why I wanted you to watch the first video. Because, as I said in that first video, you don't have to agree with every term that is used. But what's important is that you take the time to understand why the people say the terms that they say. And you take the time to understand the terms, what the terms mean that they're using. And maybe you might even find common ground with the people who are using the terms. And I do have a lot of common ground with the people that are using this term. I just don't use the term because we differ at the end. But there are major problems that are systemic in policing that need to be fixed. And that's where we unite, and that's where we can find common ground. And so, at the end of the day, we don't have to argue over the term if we can agree on what led them to the term, and we can agree that those things need to be fixed and not argue about the terminology. That's the most important thing. So I hope you understand a little bit more as to why people use the term, and I hope you understand a little bit more why, people say what they say when they say it, and maybe even come to an agreement with why they're saying it, even if you're not gonna agree at the end of the day with the term. But maybe you agree with me. Maybe you agree, hey, yes, there are some systemic issues within policing that do need fixing, and that we should all come together and fix those things, because it does go beyond just the simple couple bad cops doing bad things. But there are systems in place that protect those bad cops, and the cops that protect those systems are also bad cops too. So anyway, thank you for watching the video. This one did go a little longer than normal, but please remember to like the video, share it with your friends if you liked it, subscribe to the channel. And remember, Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left, That's Right. Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Central, here on youtube.com/Liberal Dan Radio.